Shy Omega bowed before the Alpha King's silent mother, then spoke in the ancient wolf tongue that no. The castle of the Alpha King stood like a jagged crown against the gray winter sky. Snow fell in soft, silent flakes, dusting the dark stone walls and frozen towers. Beyond the high walls, the forest stretched endlessly, twisted and mysterious, whispered to hold the spirits of long-forgotten wolves. Inside the castle, warmth and shadow danced together, torches flickering against tapestries that told stories of kings and queens who had ruled long before. Lyra walked up the wide steps, her cloak drawn tightly around her small frame. She had traveled far, through forests thick with frost and mountains sharp with ice. Her heart thumped with a mix of fear and determination. She was an Omega, quiet by nature, shy in manner, yet she carried a power within her that even she did not fully understand. It was this power that had guided her here, to the heart of the Alpha King's court. The guards at the gate studied her with suspicion. Their eyes were sharp, practiced in reading lies and hidden motives, but Lyra met their gaze with steady calm. She had learned long ago that courage was not the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. "She approaches alone," one guard muttered, voice low, as if speaking too loudly might summon danger. "She must be tested," another replied. "The king's mother will judge her first." Lyra felt the weight of those words as she entered the courtyard. The snow crunched beneath her boots, loud in the frozen silence. All nobles and servants alike. Whispers floated on the cold air like drifting snowflakes. Some spoke of her as if she were a shadow or a ghost. Others wondered what an Omega was doing at the court of the Alpha King, where power and bloodlines were everything. At the far end of the hall stood the matriarch. The Queen Mother, silent for decades, commanded more respect than any living creature in the castle. She did not speak. Her authority came from her presence alone. Dark hair flowed like a river of night down her back, her eyes cold as the winter beyond the walls. No one had ever seen her smile, and many had claimed she could see into a person's very soul with a single glance. Lyra stopped several steps away, bowing low. Her knees pressed into the cold stone. Every muscle in her body trembled, but she held the posture, waiting. The matriarch's eyes swept over her, unblinking, unyielding. "You are far from your pack," the matriarch said at last, her voice quiet but clear. It was not directed at Lyra alone. It seemed to echo inside the hall itself. Pale, Lyra felt her lips part, and then, without thinking, she spoke in the ancient wolf tongue, a language thought lost to the ages. The words were sharp and rhythmic, full of old magic.
"I will not obey the order that will harm what I cannot harm. No."
Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The nobles exchanged worried glances. Whispers rose again, louder this time, of fear, of awe. No one had ever dared speak to the matriarch in such a way. The Queen Mother tilted her head slightly. It was the smallest gesture, but in it was judgment, curiosity, and perhaps the first trace of acknowledgement in decades. Kyle. The Alpha King appeared then, striding through the hall like a shadow made of stone in authority. His black cloak trailed behind him, dusting the floor with snow. His eyes were sharp, like flint catching the firelight. He had heard the words, and he stopped short at the sight of Lyra, bowing so low yet speaking with courage that none of his nobles dared to show. "Who is this?" Kale's voice was calm but dangerous. A single wrong move could summon fury from him as easily as it could summon favor.
"She is an Omega from the northern woods," a guard said. "She
"Speaks the ancient tongue, sire." Kale's gaze returned to Lyra. She lifted her head, meeting his eyes for the first time. In those eyes he saw no fear of him, only a careful, quiet strength. Something stirred inside him, something he had buried long ago, a spark of curiosity, and something darker, an awareness of his own loneliness.
"You dare speak in the old tongue to my mother?" Cale asked, his tone even but layered with tension.
Breath. Lyra swallowed, her voice steady.
"I speak what must be said."
Obedience cannot be forced when it would bring harm. A silence fell. Even the torches seemed to dim, as if the hall itself waited for the matriarch's judgment. Finally, the Queen Mother raised a single hand and pointed toward the forest that bordered the castle. Lyra's stomach tightened. The forest was dangerous. It was said no one could enter and return without losing something of themselves, memory, fear, even the will to live. Yet the command was clear. "You must go there," the matriarch said, her voice still silent in tone, yet impossible to misinterpret. Cale's eyes narrowed. "Alone?" His voice was edged with worry, though he would never admit it. Lyra inclined her head, accepting the silent order. She could feel every gaze upon her. The nobles, the guards, the silent mother, and the king himself. Each one measured her, judged her. But Lyra did not falter. She had been born to endure trials, and she would not shy away now. That night she prepared to leave. Her cloak was heavy against the cold, her boots stiff from the journey to the castle. Yet, as she moved toward the forest, she felt the weight of unseen eyes following her. Wolves, real and perhaps spectral, stalked the edges of the trees, their eyes glinting in the moonlight. Cale followed at a distance, unseen. Psst. His heart battled with pride and duty. He wanted to protect her, but he could not reveal his fears to anyone, not even himself. He had ruled long enough to know that vulnerability was dangerous. But for some reason, Lyra stirred something inside him that no rule could contain. The snow grew deeper as she entered the forest. Every step seemed to echo in the silence, broken only by the distant howl of a wolf. Or was it a memory of one? The trees leaned close, ancient and knowing. Lyra felt the old magic in her veins awaken, as if the forest itself recognized her bloodline. Suddenly, a shadow moved among the trees. Lyra froze. Her heart raced. She reached instinctively for the wolf tongue on her lips, ready to call for protection if needed. The shadow emerged into the moonlight, revealing a wolf larger than any she had ever seen, with silver fur that glimmered like frost. Its eyes held a wisdom older than the mountains. "You have come." The wolf spoke in the old tongue, its voice deep and resonant. Lyra understood every word as if it had always been inside her mind. "Your courage has been tested, and yet your trial begins." Cale stepped from the shadows, finally revealing himself. "I will not leave you here," he said. His voice was low, carrying the weight of command, worry, and something unspoken. Lyra looked at him, unsure. "It is not your fight," she said softly, yet firmly. "This is mine. My blood calls me to it." Cale's eyes softened, but the tension in his jaw showed he would not step aside. They stood in the moonlit forest, two souls drawn together by fate and blood, by challenge and destiny. Around them, the forest whispered in the ancient tongue, as if the trees themselves remembered the promises of long ago. Then, without warning, the snow beneath them shifted. Boo! flew. Shadows moved faster than the eye could follow. Eyes glowed in the dark. More than one pair, many, surrounding them, circling like judgment. Lyra's breath caught in her chest. Kale's hand instinctively moved closer to hers, not touching, but close enough to show he would not let her face the danger alone. A low growl rolled through the forest, deep and resonant. Lyra felt it in her chest as well as in the air. She realized the forest was alive, not just with wolves, but with spirits of the past, guardians of the old world, waiting to see if the courage of the Omega and the strength of the Alpha could withstand what was coming. She turned to Kale, her eyes wide but determined. "Whatever comes," she whispered, "I will face it." Kale nodded, his expression unreadable but his eyes burning with emotion. Beth. He did not speak. No words were needed. From the darkness, the shadows shifted again, forming shapes taller and more threatening than any human or beast. The first test of her courage, and perhaps of both their fates, had begun. And as the moonlight struck the silver snow, Lyra felt the power inside her pulse, stronger than ever before, echoing the wolf tongue she had spoken hours ago. She knew the trial would not end with this night. She also knew she was not alone, even if the world seemed to wish her gone. The forest seemed to breathe around them, alive with expectation, as if the earth itself waited to judge the Omega and the Alpha who dared to follow her. And in the stillness, the first shadow lunged. The forest stretched endlessly before them, a maze of twisted trees whose branches clawed at the gray sky. Snow fell in thick, silent sheets, muffling their footsteps, but the forest was alive in ways that were hard to see yet impossible to ignore. Every shadow seemed to move, every whisper of wind sounded like voices speaking in the lost language of wolves. But Lyra's breath came in steady puffs, her heart racing but controlled. The forest had recognized her the moment she entered, and she felt its old magic awaken within her. She had always known she was different, but this was something beyond the timid Omega she had believed herself to be. Her pulse hummed with power, and the wolf tongue she had spoken earlier now felt like a key in her veins, and long buried, pale, moved behind her, silent and watchful. The snow made no sound beneath his boots, and yet every sense Lyra had told her he was there. She did not turn, though. She trusted him. Though the truth was, trust was a dangerous thing in Kale's world. His presence was both comforting and suffocating, his authority pressing against her in ways she could not yet name.
"You feel it too, don't you?"
Lyra whispered, her words barely more than a breath.
Kale's eyes flicked to her briefly, silver in the moonlight. "I feel it, but don't let it distract you." His voice was steady, but she could hear the tension beneath it, the edge of fear he refused to show. "This forest does not forgive mistakes." Lyra nodded, stepping lightly over a frost-covered root. The air smelled of old magic, of snow and earth, and something else, something ancient, waiting. She could hear faint growls, whispers, and the rustle of movement just beyond the trees. Breath. The forest seemed to breathe around her, a living thing watching her every step. Then, without warning, a howl cut through the air. Bed. Not the call of an ordinary wolf, but a long, mournful sound that seemed to pierce time itself. Lyra froze, feeling the vibration in her chest. Kale's hand moved near hers, not touching but close enough that she felt his strength anchoring her. "The spirits are aware of us," Kale said softly, his tone carrying both caution and fascination. "Raish, they test anyone who enters. They test the living and the blood of the old." Lyra swallowed. Her mind raced with memories she could not yet place. Faces she did not know flashed behind her eyes, shadows of wolves and humans interwoven, as if her blood had always belonged to this place. The forest had been waiting for her arrival, and now she understood it demanded more than courage. It demanded truth. Ahead, the shadows shifted. A wolf stepped into the moonlight, enormous and silver. Its eyes, deep pools of knowledge and sorrow. Lyra's breath caught. She recognized the shape, though she had never seen it in life. The wolf's fur shimmered as if it carried the light of the stars themselves. "You have come," the wolf said in the old tongue, deep and resonant. Lyra felt the words not only in her ears but in her chest, vibrating with a rhythm she knew. "Your courage brought you this far, but courage alone will not break what binds the Alpha's bloodline." "It is dangerous to speak to her," he warned, though his eyes betrayed his curiosity.
He wanted to know, needed to know, yet he feared what the truth might reveal.
Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear that flickered in her chest. "I do not fear what must be faced. Tell me what I must do." The wolf's gaze softened, yet it carried the weight of centuries. "The bond that curses the king's blood is not broken by force, nor by dominance. It is broken by trust, surrender, and the courage to see beyond fear. Only then will the spirits allow peace." Lyra's heart skipped, but she glanced at Cale, who had not moved closer, but had not retreated either. His arms were tense, his eyes sharp. Pride and caution warred within him. He would never admit it, but even now he felt the stirrings of a connection he could not control, a bond forged not by command but by necessity. The silver wolf stepped aside, revealing a path deeper into the forest. Lyra knew instinctively that this path would lead them to a test of both spirit and will. She took a deep breath and began to walk forward. Cale followed without question, silent as the snow that fell around them. The trees grew taller, the shadows thicker. Lyra felt the pulse of the forest in her veins, the power in her blood awakening further. Whispers surrounded her, echoes of the ancient tongue spoken by those who had walked this land long before her birth. Oh, she could feel their eyes on her, their judgment, their hope. Suddenly, the ground beneath her shivered. Frost cracked under her feet. Shadows surged from the sides, moving faster than the eye could follow. Base. She spun, speaking in the wolf tongue, and the silver wolf appeared again, flanking her, its growl low and warning. Cale moved swiftly beside her. "Oh, hold your ground," he said. "They will not harm you if you do not falter." Lyra nodded, her chest tight but steady. Best. She could feel her pulse sinking with the rhythm of the forest, her fear transforming into something fierce, something powerful. The shadows pressed closer, and she raised her hands, speaking words of command in the ancient tongue. The snow around them trembled, the shadows pausing as if they respected her strength. The first shadow lunged, a blur of dark fur and glowing eyes. Lyra sidestepped, her movement guided by instinct, and Cale intercepted another shadow, his strength and precision unmatched. Together they moved as one, Alpha and Omega, each learning the rhythm of the other. Hours seemed to pass in moments. They fought side by side, their coordination perfect despite the danger. Every glance, every silent cue, every breath between them deepened the bond forming in ways neither fully understood. Cale's stoic exterior began to soften, revealing a vulnerability he had hidden even from himself. Beth. Lyra felt it too, the stirring of trust and something more, a longing she could not yet name. Finally, the shadows fell back, dissolving into the snow. The forest was quiet once more, though the air still thrummed with power. Lyra dropped to her knees, exhausted but alive, her chest heaving. Cale knelt beside her, his hand brushing against hers, a contact that was brief but electrifying. "You have strength beyond what I imagined," Cale said, voice low, almost reverent. "But this is only the beginning."
The forest will test you further. Lyra nodded, the adrenaline still coursing through her.
She felt a strange warmth in her chest, a mixture of fear, triumph, and a pull toward the alpha beside her. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a bond forged in the heat of trial, in the shared rhythm of courage and instinct. The silver wolf appeared one last time, eyes shining with ancient knowledge.
The trial continues, it said.
The path to the curse's end is not through battle alone. You must face the truth within yourselves. Only then will the Alpha's bloodline be free, and only then will the Omega's courage be fully revealed. Lyra swallowed hard, her eyes meeting Kale's. I am ready, she whispered. Not fully certain if she was, but the forest did not allow hesitation. It demanded action, demanded courage, demanded truth. Kale studied her, his expression unreadable, and then he nodded. Then we face it together. They moved deeper into the forest, the snow turning to ice beneath their feet, the trees growing taller and darker. Whispers followed them, voices of long-dead wolves and humans who had once walked these paths, carrying warnings and guidance alike. Lyra could feel the weight of history pressing on her shoulders, but she pressed forward, drawing on the courage she had summoned to speak in the ancient tongue hours ago. And then, just as the moon reached its highest point in the sky, a figure emerged from the shadows, taller than any human, cloaked in darkness, with eyes that burned like molten gold. Lyra felt the pulse of power before she saw the face. "Do you have come far?" the figure said, voice deep and commanding. "But courage alone will not suffice. Bess. To break the curse, one of you must choose sacrifice." Kale's eyes met hers, sharp and intense. Neither spoke. The weight of the words hung between them, heavy as the snow-laden branches. The forest was silent, watching, waiting for their choice. Lyra knew deep within that this was only the beginning. The path ahead would demand more than bravery. It would demand trust, surrender, and a willingness to face what neither of them had dared to admit, the longing growing between them, the bond forming in fire and shadow. And as the figure raised a hand, light spilling like fire through the trees, Lyra felt the forest's power thrumming in her blood. This was the trial she had been called to, the challenge that would define her fate. And the Alpha beside her. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Snow-laden branches hung heavy, sparkling under the pale moonlight, while the air itself thrummed with an energy both terrifying and alive. Lyra felt it in her chest, in her pulse, in the way her blood seemed to hum in rhythm with the trees. The figure before them was still there, taller than any human, cloaked in shadow, its golden eyes like molten fire. It spoke again, voice echoing as if the forest itself had learned to speak. "To lift the curse," it said, "you must face what lies buried in your hearts. The path of dominance will fail. The path of courage will only succeed when trust is absolute." Kale's jaw tightened, his dark eyes scanning the figure, then drifting to Lyra. "Trust," he repeated, the word tasting foreign on his tongue. "Trust is earned, not given." Lyra swallowed, drawing in the cold air. "Then perhaps now, trust must be chosen." Her voice was calm, steady, yet underneath it quivered a thread of fear. She did not know what the forest demanded, only that she could not turn back.
Not now. Not after everything that had led her here.
The figure extended a hand toward Kale, and the ground beneath them shimmered like ice. Shadows twisted, rising into shapes that reflected their deepest fears. Kale's chest tightened as memories he had long buried surfaced, images of ancestors who had failed, battles he had lost, and a loneliness so deep it had never been named. Lyra's gaze softened, and she took a step closer to him. "Pei, you do not need to face this alone," she said softly. "Let me stand with you. Kale's eyes flickered, something almost unreadable passing through them. Fear, relief, a longing he did not yet understand. He had ruled with authority, with force, with the weight of generations behind him. And yet, this Omega, quiet and small in stature, challenged the walls he had built around his heart. The shadows began to swirl faster, forming faces and shapes that twisted and reached for them.
Lyra felt the pull in her own blood, the ancient wolf magic stirring.
Her claws of instinct rumbled within her spirit. She realized the forest did not merely test strength, it tested the ability to see, to feel, to let go. "Then we face it together," Kale said, voice low and steady. There was no question in it, only the sharp certainty of a man who had made his choice. Lyra nodded. Her pulse quickened, and together they stepped forward. The forest responded to them, shadows recoiling slightly, as if sensing the bond forming between the Alpha and the Omega. The first shadow lunged, a creature of darkness and ice. Lyra met it head-on, calling to the wolf within her. She spoke in the ancient tongue, commanding, guiding, and shaping the shadow into stillness. Kale moved beside her, his hands strong, his body precise, countering the next shadow with an ease born of experience. Together their movements were a silent conversation, a dance of shadow and light. Hours passed in the cold and dark, though time seemed different here, stretched by magic. The shadows did not relent, but neither did Lyra and Kale. Every trial brought them closer, every dodge and strike weaving a silent trust that neither had dared to acknowledge before. Finally, the shadows fell into the snow, dissolving like mist in sunlight. The forest was quiet, yet the air still vibrated with energy. Lyra dropped to her knees, exhausted, yet alive. Kale knelt beside her, his hand brushing against hers, a touch fleeting but electric, the kind that left a mark on the soul rather than the skin. "You have strength beyond what I imagined," Kale said, his voice low, almost reverent. "But the true trial has yet to come. The forest tests spirit as well as skill. You must face what lies within yourself." Lyra's gaze met his.
"Then we face it together," she repeated, her voice stronger this time. The bond between them was no longer silent or tentative.
It was forged in fire, in shadow, in shared struggle. And yet there was fear in her chest, for the next test promised to strike at the heart, not the body. The figure stepped forward, its golden eyes glowing brighter.
To break the curse, one of you must confront the truth you hide from yourself.
But
Only then will the Alpha's bloodline be freed, and the Omega's courage fully revealed.
Bind, Violet's eyes widened. The figure's gaze shifted between them, weighing, waiting. And then the forest shifted, the trees bending, the shadows stretching toward them. Kale's voice was quiet, almost a whisper.
His usual armor of pride and control slipped for the first time. I have ruled, commanded, and dominated, yet I have never faced the part of me that fears failure, that fears losing everything.
Best. I have let the bloodline's curse shape me, rather than fight it. Lyra listened, her heart aching with empathy. She had always felt the power within her, but now she saw the weight Kale carried, the isolation, the unspoken guilt, the fear of vulnerability.
"You are not alone," she said softly.
Your past does not define you. The forest sees truth, not lies. We face it together, not as Alpha and Omega, but as partners. Kale's eyes softened, and for a moment he looked less like a king and more like a man. A man capable of change, of trust, of connection. The forest seemed to recognize it too. The shadows that had pressed close now hovered at a distance, watching. The figure raised its hand, and the air shimmered. "Then face the truth within," it said. The forest around them twisted into visions, reflecting both their fears and desires. Cale saw himself as he had always been, proud, isolated, alone. Lyra saw herself as a timid omega, small and unnoticed, yet filled with untapped power. "You must choose," the figure said, dull.
To embrace the truth is to risk everything, but also to gain everything.
Lyra took a deep breath, closing her eyes. She reached for the courage she had summoned in the courtyard hours ago. She felt the wolf in her blood, the pulse of magic, the bond forming between her and Cale. She opened her eyes and faced the vision. Herself, strong, fearless, capable of shaping destiny. Cale mirrored her, eyes blazing with realization. He saw his pride, his fear, and the possibility of change. The chance to break the curse not through dominance, but through trust and partnership. The shadows swirled faster, testing them, pushing them to the edge of fear. Lyra stepped forward, her voice rising in the ancient tongue. Words of courage, defiance, and connection poured from her lips, shaping the forest's magic, binding the shadows, and calling forth light from the darkness. Cale followed, his own voice joining hers, commanding not as a ruler, but as a man who had chosen honesty over fear. The bond between them pulsed visibly, a thread of light weaving through the trees, connecting them, filling the space between shadow and snow. The figure stepped back, silent, observing, until the shadows finally dissolved entirely, melting into the snow and leaving the forest still, quiet, and glowing with soft silver light. The trial was over, or at least the first part of it. Lyra sank to her knees, exhausted. Cale knelt beside her, his hand finally covering hers, warm and strong. The touch carried no command, only solidarity, trust, and something unspoken that neither needed to name aloud.
"You've done it," Cale said softly.
The forest recognizes us now, but there is more to come. The curse's true heart has not yet been faced.
Then we continue. Whatever it asks, we will meet it together.
The silver wolf appeared again, standing tall and proud. Its eyes gleamed with ancient wisdom. The bond has begun, but the final trial approaches. The path of redemption is never easy, and the forest watches for hesitation. Cale's hand tightened over hers. Blair. Lyra met his gaze. "We will not hesitate," she said firmly. A wind rose through the trees, carrying whispers of old magic, of lives long past, of kings and queens who had walked this land centuries before. The shadows of their ancestors seemed to stretch across the snow, urging caution and courage in equal measure. Cale's voice was quiet, but full of uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I have never allowed anyone this close to my heart, not since before I became king. I do not know if I can." "You can," Lyra said softly, leaning just slightly toward him, "because you are not alone anymore." The forest seemed to still at her words, the snow sparkling as if in approval. Patient. Yet the distant howl of wolves, both real and spectral, warned that the true trial had only just begun. Lyra's heart beat faster. She knew the next steps would challenge everything. Her courage, Cale's strength, and the fragile bond forming between them. But for the first time, she felt ready. Not just for herself, but for the alpha beside her. And then, from the shadows, a voice rang out, a low, commanding whisper that carried through the trees like thunder. But you have grown strong, but the final choice is coming. One of you must face the heart of the curse, or all will be lost.
Lyra's breath caught. Kale's jaw tightened.
They exchanged a glance filled with unspoken words. Trust, fear, longing, courage. The path ahead would demand everything, and neither could yet see what the cost would be. The forest waited, alive, patient, eternal. The shadow moved through the forest like a living storm. It towered above them, golden eyes glowing like molten suns, and yet it was not entirely beast nor human. It radiated power older than any king or queen, a force tied to the bloodline of the Alpha and the courage of the Omega. The snow beneath Lyra and Kale's feet trembled, as if the earth itself feared what was about to unfold. Kale's hand found Lyra's again, their fingers intertwined, not as command and obedience, but as equals, facing a fate that demanded every ounce of trust between them.
This is it,
Kale whispered, his voice low and steady, though his chest tightened. No turning back. Lyra nodded, feeling the pulse of her bloodline awaken fully. She could sense the power within her, raw and alive, weaving through the forest, touching the snow and even stirring the shadow before them. She had never felt so connected to the forest, to herself. And to Kale, the shadow roared, a sound that shook the branches and sent snow tumbling to the ground. Its golden eyes fixed on Kale, then Lyra, as if weighing which of them would falter first. The forest pulsed around them, alive with the voices of ancient wolves and long-dead rulers. Lyra stepped forward, voice steady in the ancient wolf tongue. The words were a command, a prayer, a call to the magic within her. The shadow paused, recognizing her strength, yet it did not retreat. It was the heart of the curse, the embodiment of fear, pride, and isolation that had haunted Kale's bloodline for centuries. Kale took a deep breath, then spoke in turn. His voice carried authority, tempered with something softer, something he had never allowed himself to show. Bay.
We face this together, he said. Not as Alpha and Omega, but as partners, as equals.
The shadow recoiled slightly, golden eyes narrowing. It had never encountered such unity. Pride and fear had always ruled its victims, forcing them to dominate or submit. And yet here were two, standing side by side, fear mingled with courage, dominance tempered with trust. The forest responded to their bond. Snow swirled in eddies around them, light filtering through the branches like silver rain.
Lyra could feel the magic of her bloodline, the pulse of the wolves in her veins, rising to meet the power of the shadow.
She reached out, not with claws or force, but with trust, with her courage, with her belief in Kale and in herself. The shadow lunged.
Faster than thought, it struck at Kale, testing him, but Kale's movements were no longer solely those of an alpha commanding fear.
They were precise, controlled, protective. He countered, deflecting the shadow with the rhythm of a man who had chosen to trust rather than dominate. Lyra moved beside him, speaking the ancient tongue in waves that rippled through the forest. The shadow faltered, confusion flashing in its molten eyes. The bond between Kale and Lyra was stronger than its anger, stronger than the centuries of curse it carried. "You are not alone," Lyra said softly, voice carrying not just to Kale but into the heart of the shadow, perhaps. "And the curse has no hold over unity, over courage, over trust." Kale stepped forward, hand brushing hers. "Together," he repeated, "we are stronger than any fear, Any shadow, any curse. The shadow hesitated, its form flickering between darkness and light. The golden eyes softened slightly, and the growl faded. Snow sparkled around them, carrying the energy of release, of freedom long denied. Then, as if the forest itself exhaled, the shadow dissolved into a cascade of silver light. It was no longer threat but memory, its form melting into the snow, leaving only silence. The heart of the curse had been confronted, and it was broken. Cale sank to his knees, exhaustion heavy in his limbs. Breath. Lyra followed, her chest heaving, yet a warmth of victory spread through her. They looked at each other, eyes wide, realizing what had passed between them. Bait. It was more than triumph over a curse. It was the birth of trust, of mutual respect, of a bond that could withstand the weight of centuries. The silver wolf appeared one last time, standing proudly beside them. Its eyes gleamed with satisfaction. It bowed its head to Lyra and Cale, acknowledging not just their courage, but the unity that had lifted the shadow from the forest and the Alpha's bloodline. "You have chosen well," the wolf said, voice echoing in the ancient tongue. Lyra understood every word, feeling it deep in her bones. "The curse is ended, not through dominance or fear, but through trust and courage. Your bond will be your strength, your protection, your legacy." Cale reached out, brushing the snow from Lyra's cloak. His touch lingered, warm against the cold night. "I never imagined," he said quietly, "that someone like you could teach me what courage truly means." Lyra's lips curved in a small, shy smile. "And I never imagined I could face something like this without turning back," she said. Breath. Her voice was soft, yet there was strength in it. The strength of someone who had discovered her own power and the courage to trust it. They rose together side by side. The forest, once dark and foreboding, now glowed with soft silver light, as if celebrating the bond that had lifted the curse. The trees whispered gently, carrying the echoes of ancient wolves and long-dead rulers, all acknowledging the new chapter beginning for Cale and Lyra. The queen matriarch appeared then, stepping silently from the shadows of the castle beyond the trees. Her presence was calm, her gaze steady. "Bay." She nodded once, a wordless blessing that held more power than any command.
You have done well, she said finally, her voice breaking the silence.
The Alpha's bloodline is free and the Omega's courage has awakened. Together, you have restored balance. Cale's shoulders relaxed, the weight of responsibility easing for the first time in years. Best. He looked at Lyra, truly looked, seeing not just an Omega, not just a companion in trials, but someone who had touched his heart in ways he had never imagined possible. Lyra felt her own heart swell, a mixture of relief, pride, and something tender that grew between them. She reached for Cale's hand, and this time he did not hesitate. Their fingers intertwined, holding firmly, a silent promise of unity and trust. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of snow and magic. The forest seemed to glow brighter, alive with life renewed. Wolves howled in the distance, real and spectral, their cries celebrating the courage of the two who had dared to face the shadow and the curse. Cale spoke then, voice low and steady, almost vulnerable. "Bay, this bond, it is more than duty, more than blood or magic. I cannot promise I will always be perfect, but I can promise you, Lyra, I will never walk this path without you again." Lyra's eyes softened, a quiet understanding passing between them. "And I will never face it alone,"
she replied. Her voice carried the weight of all she had endured, all she had learned.
"Together we are stronger than fear, than curse, than shadow." The forest fell silent again, as if acknowledging the truth of her words.
The snow sparkled, the silver wolf disappeared, and the night stretched on, calm, eternal, and filled with the promise of a new dawn. Bear. Yet even in peace, the forest whispered hints of future trials, reminders that life, like magic, was never truly simple. But Lyra and Cale now faced them together, bound not by command or fear, but by trust, courage, and something far older than either had expected. Love. They walked back toward the castle, side by side, footprints pressed into the snow, each step a testament to their bond. The queen matriarch watched from the shadows, her gaze soft but sharp, knowing that the next chapter for the Alpha and the Omega would be filled with challenges, but also with the power to overcome them. Together. Lyra glanced up at Cale, the winter moonlight glinting in his eyes. Bah, the forest will always remember this night, she said softly. And so will we, Cale replied, his voice steady and sure. He brushed a lock of snow from her cloak, a gesture both tender and commanding in its care. And it will guide us when the shadows come again. They paused at the edge of the forest, the castle looming behind them, silent and patient. The wind stirred, carrying the whispers of the ancient wolf tongue, soft and clear, speaking of courage, of trust, of bonds stronger than time. Lyra's heart beat steadily, no longer with fear but with hope, strength in the certainty that she and Cale could face anything. The shadows of the past were gone, the curse lifted, and the path ahead was theirs to shape. Cale squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing over hers, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had forged, stronger than any magic or fear. But whatever comes, he said, voice low, we face it together.
Lyra nodded, smiling, her own strength reflected in his gaze. Together, she agreed.
The night stretched on, snow falling softly, the forest at peace. And somewhere deep within the trees, a silver paw print glowed faintly in the snow, a promise that the courage of the Omega and the strength of the Alpha would echo through the ages, unbroken, eternal.